Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7's Daily Update. I'm Jonathan Hessen, and in today's edition, we will focus initially on the Gaza Strip, as usual. Where are we at currently? There's not a lot of information with regard to the latest developments coming out of there, but nonetheless, we'll try and dissect the current challenges which the CMCC and other angles of the 20-point plan of President Trump are currently experiencing. Alongside that, Lebanon, where are we currently at? The situation obviously is intensifying, and we will try and touch on that. Next to that, Syria. Syria has faced a couple of events that unfortunately included also a number of casualties. 6 IDF troops sustained injuries just last night, and 6 of them are in serious condition. We pray for their speedy recovery. But with that, let's introduce our experts for today, to include Brigadier General, retired, Mark Emmett, formerly an Assistant Secretary of State for Political and Military Affairs. Next to him, Brigadier General in Reserve Yossi Kuperwasser, formerly the Director General of the Israeli Ministry for Strategic Affairs, head of the Research and Assessment Division at the IDF Intelligence Directorate, and currently the President of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. And last but not least is Brigadier General in Reserve Doron Gavish, who formerly served as the commander of the Israeli Air Force Air and Missile Defense, among others. And it's a pleasure to see all three of you. But let's start with you, General Kimmett. I'm sure that you had a happy Thanksgiving, and hopefully there's much to be thankful for. But when we're talking about the complexities that the United States is currently faced with, particularly in the Gaza Strip, where I'd like to focus on first, what is happening and what should be done in order to get things along somewhat more smooth, or rather smoothly, than what we're experiencing right now?
You know, unfortunately, Jonathan, we are not hearing enough news about activities going on near the Gaza Strip by American forces that are down in what we call the CIMIC, or, in fact, any additional aid being going in. The news back here in the United States is so overwhelmed by other topics that it's certainly not a news blackout, but there just seems to be an absence of news coming from Gaza. Clearly, we have American diplomats and American forces on the ground outside of Gaza trying to facilitate the civil-military relations and the reception and onward movement of humanitarian supplies. And I'm certain that intelligence sharing is continuing to go on, but very, very little information coming to the public back here about the situation in the Gaza Strip.
Thank you, General Kimmett. General Gavish, from your perspective, I understand that there is a disagreement when we're talking also on the Israeli approach versus the approach of some of the actors related to the CMCC, and more specifically the International Stabilization Force, about what should be the deployment procedure of the forces. It seems that Israel is adamant on maintaining control of the areas within the Yellow Line, while the various actors, to include, of course, the Egyptians, Qataris, Saudis, the Turks, they want to see the stabilization force enter instead of the IDF, and then slowly encroaching towards areas which are currently under Hamas control. Hamas continues to arm itself and prepare for a day after, from its perspective, probably this whole ordeal collapses. But what can you tell us about it?
Well, Jonathan, from the Israeli perspective, the main concern is the Hamas itself. And it seems that the process, or the way that some of the countries are seeing the process, is the Hamas would be the last one to be dealt with. And we have to remember that from our point of view, from the Israeli point of view, we had goals for this war, and dismantling the Hamas was one of it. We all were very happy when we saw it as part of the 20 or 21 points plan by the Trump administration. So I think this everything basically sums up to it. When would be this phase happening? Would it be something that would happen a few years from now? Or is it the first thing that is going to be dealt with? And in between of those options, I think this is where the lines are, the lines of disagreement, I would say, are there. And this is where the answer would have to be found. Of course, we know that this effort is being led by the United States. We are all looking to hear what the United States have to say about it and what are the next steps from its point of view. But just to sum it up, the question is dismantling the Hamas, who is doing it and when it is going to happen and how.
Thank you, General Gavish. General Kupelwasser, I'd like to hear your take on this as well. And to what degree is the involvement of regional actors contributing to the process of seeing Hamas disarm, or is it actually making it more difficult?
Well, it's very difficult to convince Hamas to disarm. You know, everybody would like it to happen by their own will, that they would lay down their arms. But unfortunately, it's probably not going to happen. And the regional actors are not doing what they were supposed to do in convincing Hamas to disarm. Maybe because they don't want to confront it, and maybe because they don't want them to disarm, actually, and they were misleading the Trump administration by telling them that Hamas is going to disarm. And this led to President Trump announcing the plan and behaving as if he got some commitment from Hamas to disarm. I don't think that they are going to disarm. That would eventually create a situation where we have to decide between two issues, two options. One, which seems to be the one that the Americans are in favor of, is that we keep the situation as it is right now. Gaza will remain divided, and we should start the reconstruction in the areas under Israeli control, beyond the yellow line, which is the green part of Gaza in the maps of the CCMC. And this is option one that was also supported by several Israelis that were in government but are not in government anymore, like Ron Dermer. And the other option is that Israel will take the initiative and try to force Hamas out of Gaza and disarm them by force. I think the Prime Minister and some of the ministers of the government are in favor of that. The military is in the process of developing the programs and the plans that will enable it to do that. I think that today, since we are left with almost no hostages in the hands of Hamas, only two bodies are left in the hands of Hamas, and God knows if they are going to be able to find them, we have less problems in exercising our capabilities, our military capabilities, in order to overthrow Hamas. And yes, it's not going to be a walk in the park, but as Doron said, this is necessary in order to accomplish the goals of the war, and we have to win this war, and especially in Gaza. This is critical that we win this war in Gaza, and we have to have the job finished and done. And I think that this dilemma is going to keep hovering over the Gaza Strip for a while now, but we are not that far from a decision.
Thank you, General Kupelwasser. Last night, there was a meeting that was called on by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu alongside with Defense Minister Israel Katz and the IDF Chief of General Staff Eyal Zamir, during the course of which they discussed Lebanon. There is concern in Jerusalem about Hezbollah's ongoing activities, trying to not only rearm itself, but to prepare for a possible conflagration. General Kimmett, what is the American approach to this at a time when we do see that there is somewhat of a I would say it's even more than frustration at this point from America's perspective.
Well, I would say that the American policy right now is to continue to work with the Lebanese government, both on the political and diplomatic side, and use the military funding to try to help their military have the capability to come down and start the process of disarmament. But look, I mean, we have been talking about this for quite some time. The issue has nothing to do with capability, either militarily or diplomatically. There is capability within the LAF. They can do it. They have the equipment they need. They have the number of troops they need. They have the training they need. Same thing with diplomatically. The world will stand behind the Lebanese government if they take the tough actions to disarm the Hezbollah and uproot their training bases, uproot their facilities, uproot their tunnels. There's simply the absence of will, and everybody can use whatever excuse they want. Well, we need more of this, we need more of that. But it is simply the fact that there is a great fear among the body politic inside of Beirut that if in fact Hezbollah is forced to give up their arms, won't do it, which would then cause a military confrontation between the LAF, their internal security forces, and Hezbollah, that it would drive Lebanon back into another civil war. And the fact remains is that Beirut would much rather have Hezbollah than another civil war.
So it seems, and also it has, of course, to do with the deep-rooted corruption in that country that Hezbollah is a very big part of, and therefore they have a hard time seeing the necessary reform take root. General Kupelas, I'd like to hear your take on this before we move to General Kavish. When we're looking at Hezbollah's activities, obviously Hezbollah is merely an extension of the Iranian arms, rather tentacles being the major tentacle and remaining as such despite various reports on the efforts to redivert it to other locations. What are we to take out of that? And is this an Iranian problem when we're talking about Lebanon?
Well, it is to some extent an Iranian problem. We saw Vilayati, the advisor of Supreme Leader Khamenei, speaking about this issue and saying that it's not acceptable that Hezbollah is going to be disarmed, and they sort of intervened in the business of Lebanon as if Lebanon was an Iranian controlled state, even though everything happened in the last 2 years. So it's definitely has to do with Iran. Iran really wants Hezbollah to regroup and to be able to play again the role it played in the past, or which it was supposed to play in the past. It didn't manage to play it as the orchestra was supposed to play it according to the Iranian regime. But yes, I think the Iranians are still very much involved. And the outcome is that Hezbollah is very weak compared to his position before the war, but is getting stronger and is trying, in spite of the commitments taken by the ceasefire agreement a year ago, to redeploy in southern Lebanon. It's trying to rearm itself with weapons coming from Syria, still with all kinds of leftovers, storage facilities in Syria that they left some weapons over there, and now they're trying to bring them into Lebanon. And in other means and ways, and some local production of arms, they are trying to regain what they lost. And but they're still much weaker than they used to be in the past, and they are under a lot of pressure. And the fact is that even when we took care of the chief of staff of Hezbollah this week, Hezbollah was shy about responding immediately because they feel that they are weak. And the main weakness in my mind, and this is really something we have to remember, is that they find it very difficult to explain why are they needed. What is the reason for which Lebanon should accommodate for a power like Hezbollah that is not subordinated to the government? And, Hezbollah was trying to convince everybody in Lebanon that they are the shield of Lebanon. But in fact, all Lebanese suffer because of Hezbollah. If you just get rid of Hezbollah, the economy could have recovered. The situation could have been much better. Every Lebanese knows that it's not Israel that is the reason for the instability in Lebanon. It's Hezbollah's insistence on staying an armed body. And that makes life so difficult for Hezbollah because they can't convince anybody that there is a reason for them to stay in power and to stay with their arms and actually in power in Lebanon. Now, I'm not sure that I have an argument here with Mark, because I'm not sure that the Lebanese army has the same assessment like Mark about the capabilities. I think they are not convinced that they have the capability to disarm Hezbollah. Maybe if they were convinced that they have the capability, then they would have done something more, but they are not convinced that they have the capability. Definitely, they don't have the will. I agree with that. They don't have the will. That's obvious. In my mind, they believe that they don't have the capability.
General Kupilva, so I think one of the main issues is that the Lebanese armed forces today, in its makeup, includes roughly 60 to 65% Shia. So if you take the clans that make up the Lebanese army and put one brother in Hezbollah and another brother in the Lebanese army, will one brother turn against the other? That's a question mark that needs to be asked. It's not also a matter
I
of...
agree there's no will, and for many reasons, and one of them is that much of the Lebanese army is made of Shiites. But by the way, there are more and more Shiites that are in favor of seeing a change in Lebanon, and that Hezbollah would lay down their arms. Not only Christians and Sunnis are in favor of that, also some Shiites.
Absolutely.
But yes, this is one of the reasons why they lack the will, definitely.
Well, General Gavish, I'd like to hear your take on the aspect from a defensive posture. Israel is, of course, preparing for the possible conflagration with this Iranian proxy, which still has, if we put it in context with the public information out there, roughly 1/4 of all of its arsenal for both short to medium to long range missiles. Is that something that could essentially erupt at some point against the state of Israel in the event of reconflagration?
Well, Jonathan, maybe just for a second to go back to the discussion, and I fully concur with what was said by Mark and Yossi, that we don't see the will. This is the main challenge, and there are a lot of good reasons, maybe for their point of view, why there is no will. But this is the main challenge from the Israeli point of view. And we have in Hebrew this saying, "Im en ani li mili." It translates to English, "If I'm not there for me, who will be there for me?" And this is really the question of looking from a strategic point of view, looking to the future. And I'll come back directly to your question, but it is essential, really, from the Israeli point of view, from the Israeli national strategy, because it's not only the story of Lebanon. This is also the story of Iran, and we talked before about what is happening in the Gaza. At the end of the day, we understand that we have to do the job. And if we won't do the job, someone else won't do it for us. And our enemies didn't change their intentions. And this goes back now to your direct question. This is why Israel have to be fully prepared in all the aspects, in the defense ones, in the offensive one, to tackle those strategic situations. We all want to be very optimistic about Lebanon. We all hope that sometimes, or in the coming months, something different would be done there, because we hear the Lebanese president saying again and again that this is what he wants to do, but we don't see him, as we just seeing it. We have to remember that he have a strong support by the Saudis, United States, French, and then others. He's rebuilding his capabilities. I kind of agree with Mark that if he wanted, he has some of the capabilities, at least to start with it. From the Hezbollah, we have to remember that although 90% of the strategic weaponry was destroyed, 70% of the rockets were destroyed, but they are rebuilding themselves. And by the way, out of 150,000 rockets, 30%, it's still quite a large number. So the Hezbollah is there. It still have some of its capabilities. It is not as they were before. They are not on our borders as before the last conflict with them. But they could pose a threat to Israel, and the main thing is not to allow them to gain their forces. And this is really the main issue, and this is the main strategic, I would say, the strategic point that we have to take into consideration. And when exactly are we going to act, and how are we going to act to it? We see now what we are doing. I mean, Israel now is, if once we see all kind of movements by the Hezbollah going out of the agreement, we react to it. But the question is it enough? Should we do more?
Indeed.
Once again, this is really the strategic question, and not only for Lebanon, for all around.
General Kimmett, we don't have very much time left, but yet it's important to touch on the situation in Syria. A delegation of the UN Security Council visited Damascus, during the course of which they held meetings with President Ahmed al-Shara and others, at a time when the Damascus regime, which essentially only controls limited parts of Syria, is really stepping up its pressure on the Alawite community in particular, but also against the Kurds. We do see that there are exchanges of fire with the SDF, and they continue to besiege, namely Damascus continues to besiege the Druze governorate of Sueda, south of Damascus. Where's the disconnect between the international wishful thinking that the jihadists in Damascus are able to bring about some sort of united Syria, which is peaceful enough in order to draw in additional investments and repatriate, of course, all the Syrians abroad, alongside the aspect of local persecutions and the pushing forward of very radical ideologies that do not fall shy of the Muslim Brotherhood, the Islamic State, or Al-Qaeda at that.
Well, it's quite interesting. First of all, I think the international community at this point doesn't share that assessment. But what's interesting about the situation is when we were just talking about the LAF, which has the capability to extend the writ of the central government into the south, it just doesn't have the willingness. On the other hand, in Syria, you have the willingness to try to unify the country under the direction of Damascus, but they don't have the capability. So they're in a completely different situation, which I think, in fact, the international community at this time is willing to provide the capabilities to al-Shara. The problem is, as you identified, if he does have those capabilities and unifies the country or attempts to unify the country, will that willingness also be seen as license to extend into a situation that you have just painted? Ideological purity, no multi-ethnic society, no multi-religiosity inside the country. So I suspect the young men and women that are sitting in those State Department desks around the world are trying to figure out, on one hand, the more we give al-Shara, the more powerful he becomes. And on the other hand, look at how he would use that power. So I think we're now at the point that we realize that al-Shara is not going to be a benevolent dictator. He's just going to be a dictator. And the cost of that will be for the international community to regulate So we'll see what happens.
Well, you can identify it based on the education system and the manner in which they're assimilating much of the radical teachings that they have held prior to proclaiming their own reformation, and it does not bode well to the future of the region and Syria in particular. But General Kuperwasser, we really don't have very much time left, and yet this is important to touch. Last night, we saw the 55th Brigade, Reserve Brigade of the paratroopers, enter into Beit Jan, roughly 10 kilometers or 6.2 miles from the border with Israel, during the course of which they apprehended 3 suspected terror operatives affiliated to the Muslim Brotherhood's organization, Jama'ah Islamiyah, and the locals affiliated to that same organization, also one of the offshoots of the Muslim Brotherhood, and very close to the Islamist Hamas, have opened fire at the troops, and there was a vigorous exchange of fire. I think roughly 13 terror operatives were eliminated, and unfortunately, 6 IDF troops sustained injuries, including 3 who are currently diagnosed in serious condition.
Yes, I think that explains why Israel needs to stay in the areas beyond the Armistice agreement, and why we face a real threat from this area, and why we need to make sure that any understanding between us and Shara will include a commitment on behalf of the Syrian regime to make sure that there are no terror groups in this area, in the southern part of Syria. It's not the situation right now. Right now, there are still terror groups operating there, and we have to take action in order to foil their attempts to carry out terror attacks against us. And we have to remember, we have civilian communities living near the border, and they are in danger, and we are worried very much about that. That's why we keep escalating the number of activities that we take in order to cope with this problem.
Thank you, General Kuperwasser. This is all the time that we have for today. I'd like to thank General Kimmett, General Kuperwasser, and General Gavish for all of your insights. And I'd like to thank all of you at home as well, and to wish you a Shabbat Shalom. Until our next edition